So welcome, folks, to this DevSecOps European road trip. Yay! I'm Matt Jarvis. I'm Director of DevRel at Snyk, and I'm joined by my co-host, Brian Vermeer, who's a Senior Dev Advocate. And Brian and I are going to be zooming around Europe this week on a virtual whistle-stop tour. And we're going to be super exciting, partnering with some amazing local communities, and as well as bringing you some fantastic speakers. Today's the turn of the UK. This is my home country. My background today is where I live in the Lake District in the north of England. Brian, whereabouts are you virtually there?
I'm virtually there. Like you see the nice skyline over here. This kind of skyline of pretty London, but this is Greenwich Park. So I love to be outdoors, and the sun is shining anyway. So that's why I'm here.
So we're also joined by today's speakers, Andrew Martin, Lili Kastilio. We're going to come back to you folks in a minute. And one of the other things that we're going to be doing this week is Brian and I are going to be challenging each other to find out who knows most about random facts about Europe. So we're going to be having this quiz all week and announcing the winner on Friday. So before our first talk, Brian, I think I ought to challenge you to some questions about the UK. See how much you know. So let's start with a super easy one. What English city are the Beatles from?
Liverpool.
Well done, well done. Sam, you're keeping tally here, aren't you, for the week's score? Right, now they get a bit more difficult here, Brian. So what's the national flower?
I see people putting it in the chat. Don't spoil it. Don't spoil it. Don't spoil it for me. Cheating. I don't know the answers. So
what's the national flower of Scotland?
Isn't that the? Oh, I was saying the poppy, but it's not for Scotland. I have no clue. I would say
right. Okay. It's the thistle. The thistle. So do you know what toad in the hole is? Toad in the hole.
It's probably something nasty, or at least it sounds nasty. So I have absolutely no clue.
Toad in the hole is actually a delicious dish of sausages and Yorkshire pudding. So there we go.
Well, wait. Sausages and Yorkshire pudding together, and you say that's delicious.
Baked in a dish.
But does Brian know what Yorkshire pudding is?
Yes, yeah. I know what. I know I have seen what Yorkshire pudding is, but it doesn't. Sorry, no comments.
Okay, two more quick ones before we have to go to our first speaker. So the UK has many islands. Which of these is not one of them? The Isle of Wight, the Isle of Man, or Tresco?
I think the first one.
The Isle of Wight is, in fact, an island of the UK.
I only knew the second one.
The correct answer was the Isle of Man, which actually isn't part of the UK. It's a completely separate, self-governing territory. So there we are. And finally, which of these is not a traditional UK competition? Cheese rolling, bog snorkeling, or nettle eating?
Nettle eating.
It's correct. It's correct. And in fact, I've got a couple of lovely photos that I can share with you. This are you seeing this picture here? This is the sport of cheese rolling, chasing a gigantic cheese down a hill. It's supposed to be very dangerous, and many people get injured doing that activity every year. And then the second one is bog snorkeling, which, believe it or not, people do actually partake in freezing cold water, mud, and snorkeling in bogs. So there we go. Right, that's the exciting first round over. Let me stop sharing my screen. So where are we? We'll come back and talk about the fantastic partner communities that we're working with in the UK a bit later in the show. But firstly, I want to introduce Andrew Martin. Andrew's the CEO of Control Plane, a Kubernetes security company. And what Andrew doesn't know about Kubernetes security probably isn't worth knowing. I've obviously seen Andrew talk a lot before. He's a fantastic speaker. So welcome, Andrew. So if you would like to get yourself set up there, Andrew, we will
rock and roll. Well, thank you for the kind introduction. I'm sure the Venn diagram is much larger than you suggest, but I will do my best to entertain on the topic of threat modeling today. So let's share the thing. Thank you. Yes, hello, I'm Andy. I work at Control Plane, cloud native security in the most general sense, interested in not only what Kubernetes does, but also what's around Kubernetes. What does cloud native actually mean? Well, it's sat in the cloud, and so we care about all those other integration points. And our specialism is regulated industries and slightly more difficult problems, perhaps. There is a book incoming with my auspicious and already well-written co-author, Mr. Michael Hassenglass. It is it's now pre-orderable on Amazon, which was somewhat of a shock. But if you would like to pre-order it, that will artificially inflate the rankings. And also, if you have an O'Reilly online subscription, it is available on there as well. And we cover the whole gamut of setting up a Kubernetes cluster from kubeadm as the default installation, and looking at what the defaults do, contextualized with historical CVEs, and with a view to how to run best practice hardened workloads and clusters and cloud accounts and all that good stuff. So with that in mind, we have a very prompt threat modeling run through to go. I've just realized maybe that's hide that taskbar somewhere else. Okay, so let us threat model and start off talking about Kubernetes. It's worth saying that Kubernetes is awesome, and this talk is very much focused on the things that have happened around Kubernetes, or the things that might potentially happen. Huge thanks go to Sig Auth and all the contributors and community members who work to build and bring us this incredible piece of software. So what is threat modeling? It is identifying threats and vulnerabilities to our systems in order to best respond to them and to build controls that make sense. So rather than the traditional angle that security often brings, which is not necessarily FUD, but certainly concerned with stopping things more than enabling things, threat modeling is an attempt to invert that and say, okay, well, let's understand the risks to our system early. That means that we can design the controls in the system more elegantly, place them more accurately, and then ultimately, hopefully, we deliver business value by shipping things quickly rather than being constrained in the sort of traditional straight-to-jacket approach. This is the definitive tome on the matter, Mr. Shostak's threat modeling book, and we use some of the tools and techniques as we progress through this course. So yes, reaching for the skies. Right, so threat modeling has 4 basic components that we will iterate through over the course of this talk. What's the thing? Catastrophize, what could go wrong with the thing? How do we fix the potentials and the catastrophes? And then finally, let's go back and review what we've done. Is anything ever finished? Well, obviously not. Software is part of an ecosystem that's moving. It's never finished in itself. So we then decide what's the appropriate cadence for us to loop back to the beginning and start from scratch. And that cadence is normally big system changes, maybe something new is being shipped, maybe there's a particularly high risk bit of code, maybe it's something that's had bugs in before that we're going to refactor, maybe it's just an annual or some similar cadence. And the essence of actually performing threat modeling is workshops. This is getting in person, or at least kind of vaguely face-to-face, and brainstorming. Nothing's off the table, everything is possible. And yeah, that is threat modeling at a high level. Let's go in at a slightly deeper level. So first of all, annotated by aliens, courtesy of a previous talk, what are we building? So data is the lifeblood of any company. We can all run Kubernetes, we can all get access to hosted cloud infrastructure, but what actually flows through the wires, the data, the information that's been given to us in trust by our customers, this is what we care about. It's also what an attacker cares about. So we'll look at the impact levels of things that go wrong, but also the way that attackers are interested in our systems and indeed attempt to get into them. So yeah, firstly, the business value, then the oft used CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. What this means is, for a negative event, how many of these impacts and to what depth will we be affected by it? And then we can use that information to kind of classify and order the potential threats. So we can see for an example system, we might say, well, actually, we'll have a 3-tier threat system. Level 1, reputational damage. We get on the front page of a national newspaper rag, and maybe that would affect our share price slightly if we're a listed company, but it's probably okay. Level 2, in this example, some negative press or financial loss, just of a higher value. But then finally, level 3, something that could potentially be a cataclysmic business-ending event. We're talking something like an Equifax breach or a Yahoo style breach. If you recall, Yahoo's share price went from, or the market capitalization went from billions down to not very much at all because of a gargantuan data breach, let's say. Equifax as well sort of suffers a little bit of this. So this is the business value that we're giving back to our organization. Right, so we understand our data. A couple of examples, actually. For a financial institution, we care about financial loss, but in a military context, perhaps loss of life is the kind of thing that we're modeling against. So we can threat model any scenario or situation, and we decide these impacts based upon our case. There we go. Okay, so here we have an archetypal adversary. This is Captain Hashjack from the Hacking Kubernetes book. He is out to crypto lock your data, gain some Bitcoin, whatever it would be. In this case, we've characterized him as an organized criminal. Now, this may be state affiliated, it may just be a bunch of teenagers, or somewhere in between, but generally they have the same kind of patterns and practices. There indeed is Dread Pirate Captain Hashjack in all his 8-bit monstrous glory. So Hashjack comes in here on the anti-penultimate line, second up from the bottom, organized crime. But we can see there are numerous threat actors who might be interested in causing us some late nights or stealing some of our data. At the bottom tier, we have script kidders and vandals. On some of the other training that Control Plane delivered, we say that the minimum viable cloud native security is just scanning for CVEs. And obviously our reputable hosts are preeminent in this department as well. We shouldn't be shipping a CVE to production that somebody can take us out with a drive-by attack of, to convolute the sentence slightly. So Kali Linux, these open proof of concepts on GitHub, if we can't defend ourselves from anybody who can string together a few lines of bash, well, we're probably, I would say, verging on professional negligence. If we were in civil engineering, we wouldn't be able to get away with that. So the adversary level, vandals, script kidders, we should always be above that as a baseline. Motivated individuals become slightly more difficult depending upon their motivation, of course. Insiders and cloud service insiders we can see are of a particular risk. Cloud service insiders are rare, but there was one a few years ago, or the last 2 years, I think, with the Capital One breach. The person involved knew some information that they gained while they were running or while they were working at AWS that they were then able to exploit for server-side request forgery on a WAF IAM configuration. And then at the top, obviously we've sort of sandwiched organized crime, but at the top then we have the Foreign Intelligence Service. Most of our customers do not bother because this gets very expensive. We have to consider all the possible controls that we might want to mitigate risks with. And as you can see there for the sample attacks, Stuxnet and Sunburst, both really highly complex and technical attacks that required funding and strategic planning and all of those things. So in threat modeling, we must choose our adversaries from this matrix because it then informs the way we respond to what can go wrong, which in space terms is discovery of one of these. So there are multiple ways to gather and, as I say, catastrophize these threats. The most important one, I think, is the use of the expertise that the team has. Diffuse thought, there's no wrong answers at this stage, and just kind of playing out, oh, but the other day, maybe we kind of accidentally, there was a period of time when I left auth off for something, and maybe, I don't know, it's quite convoluted, but maybe there was an insecure cipher was being used. Okay, but we fixed it, but we note that down as something that could happen to the system going forward. And indeed, if it did, what's our secondary control? Do we have a credible second way of preventing that from being exploited? Once we've done that and gone through the gut instincts and intuitive section, it then helps to go and enumerate other threat sources. So we have all sorts of useful things in here. Those Kubernetes attack matrices, financial services, user group attack trees, that just lists the threat objects, the risks to our systems, everything from certificates being stolen to incorrect network policy or admission controllers failing open or regular expression bypasses, all stuff that's happened, and we can enumerate and say, okay, well, how much do we care about this and what effective control does it do for us? MITRE ATT&CK, of course, is a useful instance of one of those threat enumerations. We can also bear in mind threat modeling often covers application level security. In the context of what we're doing today and kind of more generally what control plane do, we focus on the application as already potentially compromised, already hostile. That gives us the advantage of creating a different topology for the system, which is more paranoid by default. And it also means to some extent that we just expect AppSec to be of a certain standard. It's fairly clear to us as an industry what shift left means. The patterns and practices are becoming reasonably well established. We have security champions within application teams who tend to sort of move the needle for the organization by being quite effective. So for the purposes of this, the OWASP top 10 is kind of secondary to what we're looking to achieve. We care more about things like this, the Microsoft threat matrix with different types of container breakouts and cloud resource access. So just scoping those threats, yes, we should be concerned that somebody can get remote code execution into a pod, because that is a foothold from which an attack will potentially launch. But we should also be really cognizant of our infrastructure and, as I say, our cloud account interactions. So what do we do for each process or data flow? And we could say this is maybe just using the kube control against the API server. Maybe it is an application level thing. So we have got a socket open to the internet, let's say for our web server, and somebody's able to get remote code execution into our pod. Then what potentially could they do? Well, you could say spoofing. That's in a Kubernetes case, that's taking the workload identity, the service count, and using it to make other requests. Tampering, which is using your privilege or access rights to maybe change data in a database. Repudiation, with good enough logging, this becomes difficult. As long as we have our Kubernetes audit logs and our pod logs being shipped as they're generated outside of the system, the attacker would have to compromise not only the initial point of access, but also the data at rest, those logs at rest, in order to cover their tracks. Information disclosure, well, that's kind of stealing something as well. If we can tamper, we can probably do some of this as well. Denial of service or denial of wallet is either taking something down for the sheer glory of anarchy, or using the compute resources to mine coin or whatever that would be. And then finally, elevation of privilege. Well, let's actually try and get out of the pod. And maybe it's container breakout, maybe it's a lateral transfer into another pod that's got an open, unauthenticated thing. So Stride gives us a framework by which to enumerate all the bits of the system, and then for each bit, iterate through these things. So we start with this diffuse thought process. Once we've captured that, we then go back through using Stride against perhaps the matrix that we see here. And that gives us hopefully a good coverage of lots of threats, which means we can generate an attack tree. These are awfully good fun. They are a visual way of mapping out an attack. It gives us, again, a way of taking the abstract thought process that is threat modeling and is in its own way relatively difficult because it is just an abstraction and it's kind of mental model creation, and just codifies it, sticks it on a page. We can all discuss something that we can point and refer to. Some organizations will also weight the lines, the vertices between the nodes, so that you can calculate some sort of likelihood or risk score. It can be a little bit of a kind of academic exercise. You can also do it by intuition. Ultimately, all of threat modeling is a discussion, and it's the human elements to compare with the technical, because of course we don't even turn the system on many times in a threat modeling exercise. We're just talking about the system in the abstract between ourselves. Maybe you'd go away and sort of reconfirm things, especially ciphers or the way that things are deployed. But yes, in general, intuition and discussion on these things is better in my mind than adherence to I don't know, dogma or principle and scoring in that case. So one of the important things about an attack tree is you see the legend in the top right hand corner. The OR node, which is green, needs one of its descendant nodes to be true in order to proceed. So we can see the leak of a sensitive document, the negative case at the top of the tree, it's green, so it just needs one of the preceding 4 nodes to be true. And then if we go for the left-hand node there as well, compromised delivery person, well, again, it's green, so it needs either impersonation or bribery from the 2 beneath. And we can see, because this is a top-down attack tree, the negative outcome is at the top. And so we would look to then apply controls that cut one or more of the branches of this tree. That's the useful thing about an attack tree, because you can then visualize, well, perhaps in order to not have, say, the still building pass or key, okay, well, one control there could be to add biometrics. Maybe that's an expensive thing to do. For guards, observes documents during entry checks and it could be bribed. Maybe there's more screening that we could do for our security guards. Maybe we have 4 eyes on important decisions, that kind of thing. So again, a visual representation to hang abstract security controls from. Okay, so what did we do about it? In this case, tried to burn it with fire. When we're looking to remediate issues in Kubernetes, the shared responsibility model is often the linchpin that sort of underscores the whole shebang. We can rely upon the cloud provider for a number of different parts. Here we see the infrastructure as a service means that the hardware, the boots, the kernel, various other things, including network, are provided for us. So we don't have to specifically encrypt our network traffic against other tenants of the cloud. If we were in an on-prem data, if we were in our own on-prem data center, we would be concerned with the underlaid network encryption. But often we can just say, well, the cloud provider will sort this out for us. Obviously, we can see at the top, cloud providers will never get involved with the actual application itself. That is always our responsibility. So we have, for each risk that we raise against the system, 4 ways of dealing with it. We can either excise the feature altogether, which is the nuclear option, mitigate it, and that's generally what we're trying to achieve. Mitigation of risk means that we have done something that reduces the potential impact of that risk, and that's a security control. That is a second control, or it could also be something observational, doesn't have to be enforcing, it could also be notifying. We can accept the risk, which means an individual has to personally say, I'm happy that the likelihood of this happening is low enough that if it does happen, I will answer for it, which this is where we have risk owners, and often a CISO type position will have to take that risk personally as well. Or we can transfer, which means spending money to hope it doesn't happen and buy sufficient insurance. And as I say, we can have multiple types of control. Preventative is, for example, pipeline-based security. It is scanning, it's static analysis, it's dynamic testing. And that means that we cannot progress through the pipeline stage unless we have a green tick for those tests. Detective says, okay, well, we can never fully prevent anything. So let's also run intrusion detection systems. Let's also make sure that we have our audit logs and some of our pod logs going to a SIEM or something that can extract or correlate events to notify us that perhaps something is wrong. Corrective, which essentially says, well, let's mix preventative and detective at runtime. If our IDS fires, then let's freeze the pod in time or shut it down. Other things that we can do, again, you see the on-prem mindset, because of the nature of Kubernetes trying to run many containers across many nodes, if we stick to old school perimeter-based segregation, we lose a lot of the cloud native advantage, which includes resistance to churn, high scalability, and this bin packing concept. So we can get many different types of workloads onto fewer nodes. So there are other, as I say, kind of ring-fenced perimeter-based security controls that we can add. They're useful sometimes in that we should never co-tenant workloads of different data classifications. So that makes some sense. But again, this will depend upon your own organization's threat model, your risk appetite, and how that balances with the actual cost of putting every workload on a different node pool, for example. And then we ask ourselves, did we do a good job? In space, yes, but here on Earth, so how do we know that we did a good job? Well, we have taken our architecture diagrams of the system and we've enumerated the possible threats in a workshop. We have taken that and we have expanded upon it with Stride. We've catastrophized, and then we've chosen some controls. So we can say, in order to try and prevent this or lessen the impact, let's apply this control. If it cuts across multiple branches of the tree, all the better, because it's less maintenance work for somebody in the future. It's hopefully a little bit more simple than doing two controls for two branches. We map those onto an attack tree and yeah, visually assess what we've done. So here we have taken a negative outcome at the top, and we've put our controls, so C2, C25, etc., all relate to specific controls that prevent one of these negative outcomes. And this gives us a view, again, on what we've cut and how effective our security controls are. It will also show us if there are controls that we do not have. So a notable one is on the far left of the diagram. We have exploitable vulnerability in container with a remote code execution as well. A useful mitigation there, of course, is running IDS, because remote code execution means a different runtime behavior and pattern to what we would normally expect. And it gives us an opportunity, as I say, to detect and take a preventative action of some description. There we go. The tagline is to prepare for the unexpected and do so via ideation. This workshop is actually 4 hours long, and by pure coincidence, I will deliver the whole 4-hour thing in about an hour's time at KCD UK. So it's all free if anybody wants to come to Kubernetes Community Days UK and be regaled by a fuller version of this talk. You're perfectly welcome. We do lots of training for stuff. We like training. And that is the end. Thank you very much for your attention.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Thank you, Andrew. Amazing talk. I saw that there were a few questions in the chat. We will save them for later. But first, we need to go to our second speaker. And it is the most fabulous Lili Kastilio, one of my favorite colleagues, of course, and I always say that to everybody, of course. But Lili is a technical service architect within Snyk, and she will talk about third-party dependencies and what the problem is if you use them in, well, probably a kind of a naive way. However, I would just want to tell you that Lili is quite a seasoned speaker nowadays. Within most of the time, she talks about TypeScript and leadership, but I saw on Twitter that recently you did a bunch of Python stuff as well. So Lili, what's up?
What's up? I've actually learned Python as one of my first languages, and then JavaScript. So Python is still my go-to for my side projects.
Yeah, I still try to convince you to go to the Java world, but probably that is something that that I need to keep trying. Anyway, I want to give you the I want to say the stage, but the virtual stage, and do your talk. I'm curious, so let's go.
Great, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Lili. I'm a technical services architect at Snyk. And recently, as restrictions have been easing off, I'm sure many of you have possibly been browsing to go away on holiday. Maybe you've been buying some flights online. Maybe you've been looking for a nice hotel room to stay at, maybe just a weekend getaway somewhere. Maybe you just want to have a fun night out with your friends. A breach that affected me personally was the MyFitnessPal and the Under Armour hack from 2018. MyFitnessPal is a food logging app. It lets you track the food that you eat throughout the day, as well as exercise, to help you keep track of your health. And on 30th of March 2018, I received an email titled "Important Message Regarding MyFitnessPal Account Security." And let's be honest, this is not an email you ever want to receive from anywhere. The email stated that there has been a breach and that the data affected included usernames, email addresses, and hash passwords. They've made the news lines all over the world. And that's because at the time, mine, along with 150 million other accounts, have been compromised, making it the biggest data breach of 2018 at that time. By the end of the year, this actually dropped down to the 4th biggest. In the hours following the announcement, Under Armour saw a 4.6 share price drop. And this is typical from a company in this situation, according to a study commissioned by Centrify called The Impact of Data Breaches on Reputation and Share Value. And it states that you can expect about a 5% share price drop, 7% loss of customers, and up to 30% loss of partnerships. And I get it, it can be tricky if people no longer trust you with their sensitive information. But nowadays, there is more that can happen as well. You can be liable to fines as well as legal action, as we saw recently in the news from both Facebook as well as British Airways. No matter how hard we try as an engineering team to write good code, no matter how many security headers we have set to protect ourselves from some simple attacks, even creating a custom CMS because it is more secure is just simply not enough. Our applications are still vulnerable to malicious attacks. And not only are we sort of susceptible to making the kinds of mistakes that introduce vulnerabilities, but we also voluntarily bring in other people's mistakes into our code bases every single day. And we do so by introducing open source dependencies. Modern applications can have hundreds or even thousands of dependencies. And it's not unusual to find yourself in a situation where the majority of your code is actually third-party code, especially if you're using something like NPM. But we do love open source. Open source helps us get going faster. It helps us integrate with third parties. And let's be honest, we don't have all the time in the world to write every single thing from scratch. And there is no guarantee that we would do a better job than the current most popular package out there that's been tested by thousands of users for many years and has all the features that you could possibly want. However, there is also this idea that open source is more secure. And there's even a law that kind of emphasizes this, called Linus's law. And it states that given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. However, if you have not put effort into securing your code base, then it is simply not secure. In the recent Snyk survey, only 30% of maintainers say that they're confident in their security knowledge. 26% have never conducted a security audit on their code, and yet these are the maintainers and packages that we trust to sit on our production servers. There's been an increase in published packages across all ecosystems. But with that, the vulnerabilities are also on the rise. NPM vulnerabilities increased by 47% in 2018. Maven Central by 27%. And you can see year to year, there's generally an increase. And this is significant. And that's because most attackers exploit known vulnerabilities. For example, from the Java struts remote code execution vulnerability, the spike on this graph is the number of attacks following the disclosure. And you can see it tapers off as applications get patched up. So it's really important to get familiar with some of the most common attacks and know how to remediate against them. So I want you to take a look at two most common attacks. First of all, XSS cross-site scripting. There are three types of XSS: stored, reflected, and DOM. Stored XSS means that malicious code has managed to get unsanitized into the database and then also managed to be output unsanitized back onto the web page. The attack could look something like unintended data was saved via some form input. The server renders the page with the data on all subsequent requests. For example, if we have attacker Bob, who has managed to go to some forum and save a malicious comment with a script, then when Alice and Joe come to that post and read the comments, the script will be retrieved from the database and executed. Second type is reflected, where the malicious string originates from the victim's request. And what do I mean by that? Let's say an attacker sends a phishing email or posts a malicious URL somewhere on a blog or forum. And then the server renders that URL, but because of the vulnerability, the script that's attached at the end can then be input onto the page. So let's say, again, our attacker Bob has maybe purchased some of that data available on the black market. It's not very expensive. And because he knows which website he bought the data from, he's able to craft an email to either pretend to be that website or perhaps to cater to your interest to make you click the link that might have a script at the end. As the output is not encoded, when the page is rendered, the script will be present. And that means that Joe could find himself with the sensitive data logged back to Bob. And the last type is DOM XSS, where the malicious string originates from the victim's request, but this only affects client-side JavaScript. It's a similar situation again. Bob has managed to create an interesting enough email to trick Alice into clicking through the links. Maybe it was a top 10 best cat toys, and Alice loves her cat and wants to buy some new toys. Then when she clicks through, it will be the real website where she can buy the toys. However, because the website was vulnerable, the script can be embedded and then sensitive data again logged back to Bob. Sanitization is simply not enough. We need to make sure that proper encoding of output is happening. For example, we could be trying to cover every single possible use case, but you'll be spending a lot of time trying to craft all of your code to handle everything. And you could have an input that looks something like this. It's just simply not possible to keep up. If you want to learn more about XSS, check out the OWASP's XSS cheat sheet. And the second most common attack is denial of service. And it is an attack aimed at making the system inaccessible to users. It can be used as a distraction tactic to perhaps divert the attention of the victim while you do something else as they're struggling to get the website back up. In particular, I want to talk about the regular expression denial of service. And that's where we can take advantage of the regular expressions that might be in this application and craft such an input in order to make the regular expressions struggle and therefore consume more and more CPU and generate the denial of service. And let's be honest, regular expressions are really hard, right? They're not intuitive to write, they're tricky to review. So it's really easy to find yourself in this situation. Something the attackers take advantage of is called catastrophic backtracking. So when we do a match for a regular expression, we match the first character and then proceed to the second character. However, if the second character match has failed, we're going to go back to the beginning, backtracking back, and then we're going to try a different path. So if we backtrack too many steps, the performance is affected. For example, if we have a regex that states that I'm looking for a string that has an A, followed by a B or a C, a number of times, all of that a number of times, and then D at the end. So when we get to the 3 C's in the middle, we could read them as 3 C's. Maybe it's 2 C's followed by a C. Maybe it's a C followed by a C followed by a C. Or maybe it's a C followed by 2 C's. You can see how this can quickly get quite big. The more characters with multiple valid regex paths generate an increase in backtracking steps. And this can eventually become really, really slow and exponentially slower given the input size. So I've tried one of those sites that you can use online where you can sort of play around. And this is a string that I've crafted to try and sort of generate as many steps as possible. I've managed to get to 34,000 characters, which ended up generating almost 30,000 steps. That's a lot. Unfortunately, I couldn't go back and do any more because this particular website has actually implemented a check for catastrophic backtracking to stop users from doing what I did. So that took 117 milliseconds. But if you generate a larger string, or if the regular expression is more complex, you can exponentially make this slower and slower and slower. And then, I mean, if this is the pull request that you're looking at, and this is the regular expression, let's be honest, are you really going to spot what's wrong with this? It's really difficult. However, you might be wondering, is your application, web app, product secure? And I think I'd probably have to say, definitely. And if you don't believe me, ask yourself, do you know all of the dependencies that are used throughout all of your repos in your code base, including the dependencies of the dependencies? Do you know if there are malicious packages used somewhere? Do you know if there's vulnerable package versions? There was a ESLint malicious package that maybe some of you have heard about or experienced at the time. And because of the malicious version, over 25,000 packages online were affected. And that's scary. Do you know if any of your dependencies are no longer maintained? It's really easy to be using something and not realize that it's no longer maintained. However, it provides a perfect opportunity for somebody to say, hey, I'll continue maintaining this package, but they might not have the best intentions. So it's important to know. Do you scan for vulnerabilities regularly? What about OS upgrades? Do you know if your Docker images are always up to date? Do you have a way to notify you if there's a new version and you need to release it? What about your dependencies? Are they updated regularly? You can use things like npm check updates, yarn upgrade interactive, dependabot, or your Snyk's capability as well. What about pen tests? Do you regularly conduct them? Do you defend against almost top 10 risks? Do you know what they are? And do you have a security champion? This can be somebody that helps educate the company on what security should be. And as you saw in the previous talk, sometimes some of the steps require human error. So it is important to understand all the different aspects of security and how they all play together. You can learn more about OWASP. I highly recommend. There's so many resources. Top 10 is a great place to start. And now imagine the future where security is part of your everyday process. You get security commit status checks, you have Slack email alerts, you have dependencies that are always up to date, you have security pre-commit get hooks, you have IDE security errors, and all of this is automated. Fixing a vulnerability is a simple click of a button, or even better, automated, so you don't have to do anything, and you get security breach alerts. Secure code base is a journey, and you can take your first steps today. The things I mentioned are only a small subset of the things that you should be thinking about. So it's good to start anywhere and continue that journey. And remember that security is everyone's responsibility, not just the security teams. We all have responsibility to understand what role we play and how we can help make code bases more secure, and protect our customer data. Thank you.
Thank you, Lily. All right. Matt, shall we first go through the questions, or shall we first announce the great communities that's sponsoring us? What do you think?
Well, let's see what questions we had in the chat. Shall we start with? I know there were a couple for Andrew. So about this one to start with, Andrew. For Kubernetes, which threat modeling technique would you recommend, stride or attack trees?
They are not necessarily mutually exclusive. The stride process is about that enumeration and the catastrophization step, and the attack tree is a form of visualization for how those controls can be applied. So if you have the time, and ultimately a lot of this is about budget and time boxing, I'd recommend doing both. We generate attack trees for every threat model that we build, and stride is one of the ways of catastrophizing and enumerating threats. So there's other options available there too as well.
Awesome. Hopefully that answered the question. Any more questions in the chat for either Lily or Andrew?
Well, I saw there were a few questions in the Q&A part.
Perhaps I've missed some.
So first, Hamad asked for the link, and from the timestamp, he probably means the links to the research that Lily is referring to. And Lily, I assume you're referring to the state of open source security researches in your with the 30% numbers and that kind of stuff.
Yes, I can absolutely update the slides. I'm not sure if you're going to share them with the link. Yeah, it's the state of open source security.
Yeah, I will share the links to the both open source security reports from 2019 and 2020 right now in the chat, so you can look at them right away. Another question is from Dennis. One of the common problems in remediating third-party packages is because they are third-party. Can Snyk provide or suggest alternative packages with similar functionality that basically are not vulnerable or do not have the same vulnerabilities? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's a new tool called Snyk Advisor, which does exactly that currently for pip and Docker. So you can see the similar packages that are recommended. So you can have a look at the package health, see that maybe it's no longer maintained, and then you can browse through the similar packages for that. Another alternative is, of course, if you can't find another package, is to fork it and release it yourself so that you can be patched for your own alternative. This isn't ideal because then you're maintaining this, but it can buy you some time while you open the pull request to the original package.
Yeah, I think we're going to see more and more tools like Advisor. I think over the next couple of years, with this whole focus on supply chain things, I think people are starting to get a lot more aware of some of the issues which are really important about how you use upstream software, and having those insights not just into security vulnerabilities, but as you pointed out, Lily, like, is it maintained? What's the community like? And these are all things that are in some ways equally as important as whether that thing has got vulnerabilities in it, right? Because, if you happen to be, choosing something that's got one contributor and they haven't touched that package for, 2 years, then that's likely as bad a choice really for when you include upstream software as finding something that's got vulnerabilities in it.
One of the questions in the chat as well is why not automate the security process?
There was, I guess, there can be an interesting scenario where if you're auto-merging pull requests and there is actually a malicious package update, that you have just auto-merged yourself a vulnerability. So there is a pro and a con to this. So it's important to know when the package upgrade is potentially malicious.
Absolutely. And I think it's also like, if you automate things, you have to be aware that your test suite of your application should be top notch, because it might break API, it might break other kinds of things that you are not aware of if you automate these pull requests. Christopher asked, like, are there any tools you can recommend for example, dependency auditing?
Yeah, of course. I mean, Snyk, I have to say that first. You can use Snyk. GitHub has a way to audit your dependencies as well. NPM, Yarn. Honestly, a lot of package managers nowadays have a way to tell you that there is a package with a known vulnerability, so you can keep an eye on those.
And specifically, Christopher asked for Maven pumps. I know Maven pumps, and I know that in Maven there are commands to do the same thing and ask for if there are newer versions of a particular dependencies available or not. And again, you can connect your stuff to Snyk, and they can do it all for you. Let's see if there are any more questions coming up. I might ask for contact details for the speakers. I already put the Twitter handles for both speakers in the chat. So if you want to reach out to the speakers and ask them questions, feel free to ask them over Twitter. That is probably the best and easiest way to connect with either of the speakers. And I see both of them nodding, so that is what I believe is true. And well, I just saw that Sam is putting in the LinkedIn handles as well. Is Snyk familiar with the Nix package manager? Any plans for your scanner to support it? See Nix for an existing open source scanner. I honestly don't know the answer to that, to be fair, but maybe you as a technical service architect, Lili, know more about if we support this or not.
We don't support Nix because I've never heard of it. So there's definitely something for us to look into and see what it does and how it can integrate with Snyk.
Absolutely, great answer. All right, I think that's a wrap up for all the questions that we have. So I give it back to Matt, because you have some things to say about the great communities that help us out in this road.
Yeah, absolutely. So we should give everybody a mention who's been involved in bringing this particular episode of the DevSecOps European road trip to life. Let me just get my list here. So a big shout out to Cloud Natives UK, who I'm kind of also here representing with my alternative hat on. The Roundabouts, Virtual Java User Group, Manchester Java, Southwest Java, the London Java community, and Fujay.io. I think hopefully I've captured them all there.
I think you did. I don't see more on the list, to be fair. So
excellent. And so we probably should introduce the rest of the week, right, Brian? So tomorrow we are in France.
Yeah, that will be a challenge. My French is not that good, so I'm Duolingoing now to make sure that I can do my presentation in French. I'm just uncertain that it will make any sense, so probably we'll just go with English. But tomorrow is France, absolutely. And
then your home country.
Yeah, that I will do the hosting, the majority of the hosting for the Netherlands as well, because I assume that you will have problems pronouncing Dutch names and Dutch words, won't you, Matt?
I wasn't planning on speaking any Dutch, but who knows? Things may change between now and then.
Hey, you've got 2 days left to practice, like today absolutely. And tomorrow. So maybe why not?
And then Germany on Thursday, and the Nordics on Friday. Which I'm super interested in our quiz questions for particularly for the Nordics, because I know there's lots of obscure facts about the Nordics that are going to be challenging for both of us.
Absolutely. For the Dutch part, I will do the 5 questions for Matt, but for the other countries that we're basically not based in, we do 3 questions either way. So Matt will come up with 3 questions for France for tomorrow, and I will come up with 3 questions for France, and see. Hopefully, we don't have any duplicates, but we probably have enough fun facts, obscure facts, funny facts to challenge each other to see what's going on. From this side, I want to thank both speakers for the great talks. Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Lili, and absolutely thank you, Sam, who's also on this call, who has done everything that is on the background. So all the preparations, we're just here. I won't say because of the pretty face, but we're just here to do the hosting. Sam is basically here for the pretty face, but I'm not sure why I'm here. But so thanks for that. Thanks for the whole team that helped us setting this up. And if you folks have any more questions, feel free to ping the speak us directly either on LinkedIn or Twitter. Both handles are in the chat. Any ending words from your side, Matt?
I just wanted for all the cloud native folks on this call, it is Kubernetes Community Days UK week this week on Wednesday and Thursday, 2 full days of conference. I know Andrew's speaking, lots of other fabulous speakers from across the UK. You can find all the details of that. I will put the link in the chat. If I can find it. This is all completely free, so please do join us for that. As I said, we're in France tomorrow in exactly this time slot, Sam. So we're in the same time slot all week. So you know exactly where you can find me, Brian, and lots of fabulous guests.
And all the videos will be live on the Snyk YouTube channel a couple hours after each day. So Lili and Andrew's recordings will be there later today. So jump onto that if you want to share it or rewatch it or anything like that. All the recordings will be on YouTube. Cool. And that's a wrap.
All right.
Thanks
Thank you
for
so
having
much.
us.
And
Everyone.
for the folks that join the rest of the week, see you tomorrow in France.
See you in France tomorrow.
Bye.
Bye.